sociability on the internet. And his communication is called Good Food, Genders, and Social Networks in Morocco.
Vous m'écoutez? Vous m'entendez?
Oui, tout
Can you
à fait,
hear me?
Hajar.
Yes, we can hear you, Hajar.
Alors très bien, tout d'abord, merci Audrey pour la
Thank you very
présentation.
much, Audrey,
Je
for
suis
your
vraiment
presentation.
contente de pouvoir
I'm
échanger avec
really
vous,
happy to be
surtout pour
able
parler
to
d'Internet,
exchange with you,
pour
especially
parler
to be able
d'Internet
to talk
sur
about
Internet. Alors ma
the
question va
internet
être,
on the
il
internet.
y a pas mal, je suis
So
aussi contente parce qu'il y a pas mal de points qui
I'm
coïncident
also very happy because there are quite a few
avec la
points
communication
that
la communication qui m'a précédée, surtout notamment en ce qui concerne
are in
les
common with
configurations
the communication that we've just heard, especially
de
concerning
rôles féminins et masculins à la maison
the
et le Covid. Donc, sur
feminine
Internet,
and masculine roles in
l'alimentation
the
occupe
house
un
and
territoire
COVID.
visible,
So
c'est-à-dire un
absolutely
territoire
human
visible, c'est-à-dire un ensemble de lieux
alimentation,
intertextes,
human
que ce
food,
soit des
sorry,
pages,
does
des blogs,
occupy
des
a
pages aussi
lot of
Facebook ou
space on the
Instagram liées à
internet, whether
ce qu'on
it's
a par exemple une
pages or
connectivité, comme le territoire
Facebook
scientifique, le
posts,
territoire
etc. We
politique,
have the
participer par
political
exemple
territory.
à la main clandestine, à la bonne alimentation. Et ce qui en découle dans un groupe Facebook arabophone particulier. C'est un groupe qui utilise la dialecte d'Abidjan. C'est un groupe qui s'appelle Cousinta, qui signifie notre cousine. C'est un groupe.
It's a group. It was started in 1998 by men, and it's a Facebook group, and it is a gender mixed Facebook group, which is quite rare because normally groups about cooking are normally feminine. This one is a very, very dynamic group, and people post very regularly on all sorts of subjects that concern good food. And basically it's based on these criteria that we decided to choose this group especially. Now here we have looked at how this discourse represents this category of good food, and what are the changes between men and women. Do they have are they reinforcing food norms that are traditionally Moroccan food norms, or are they breaking with them? And at the same time, how can this give us information about the way people think about food in Morocco, and how has COVID-19, the COVID crisis, changed this? Because this is a crisis that has brought together internet, gender, and good food. Now, I use the ethnographic system on the Cuisine Facebook group. It's called Our Kitchen, as I said. So our work was based on observations, but the observation took place in two phases. There's a first phase, which took 2 months, June and July. And during that time, we looked at all of the different posts to have a general idea of what people were posting. And okay, I'm going to try and slow down a little bit. So also to have a general idea about the content of the group, and at the same time to detect the recurring words. For example, you have the words akal and makla, which means food, and then you have hajar, which means quarantine. And the second phase of observation was more targeted. We used filter parameters proposed by Facebook to try and start research with makla, akl, and hajar over 2 periods. So 2019 and 2020, to try and compare what was happening before the quarantine and during the COVID crisis. So after that, we completed this observation job by 6 comprehensive interviews with the members of the group, Kuzintna, both men and women. So by talking about an observation which I made by looking at the different posts and the comments and the photographs on this Facebook group. And it's true that it is a diversified group, and they talk about good food and tasty food, but there is something that we realized, which is that eating within the standards of good food, or rather healthy food, from the women's point of view, was because they wanted to lose weight, whereas for the men it was because they wanted to keep healthy. So the comments of the women are all about the reduction of the proportions of the body. It says, here's juice based on fruit that I drink in my diet, and I've been told that fruit can bring your weight down. This was in 2019. And at the same time, in for example, men allow themselves more heavier food, for example, rafisa or couscous. And this is about, this of course is, when you look at the framework of good food, men come to it, or healthy food, men come to it after they've had a food poisoning or because they've had problems in their digestive system. So they've for a long time they ate too much meat, too much fat, too many fatty foods, and therefore they harmed their health. And now they've come back to a healthful diet. So there are two women whom we interviewed who explained to us that that for women it's not necessarily only about going on a diet, or because they want to lose weight, but women can decide to eat healthy in in order to put on weight. So you, when whatever you can eat can do you good, but when you're too thin, you feel that people think that you are not good looking. There was an interview with a woman who was 31 years old. She found herself in Moroccan social in Moroccan society, it's not good for a woman to be too thin. So there's also women are afraid of speaking clearly or openly about this in a public space like a Facebook group with men, and they were much more comfortable when they were speaking to another woman, and since it was an anonymous interview, so they were able to express their problems with these things. So whether it's about losing weight or gaining weight, it is because Moroccan society has a list of criteria about the perfect body of women. So, and therefore, women choose to adapt what they're eating to the kind of food that will help them to achieve this imagined body. So, to sum up this part, we could say that the concerns of both sexes are actually quite different. On the one hand, you have feminine aspirations to fulfill standards of beauty that which are culturally different in Morocco, as well as the men who have a different attitude to a healthful diet, because they come to it because they are forced to, because they want to survive. They've had a health problem. So the point of this part was to try and show that men and women are not subjected to the same social pressures, and often response to the different degrees of pressure that they're subjected to. And so now the second phase is about the interviews, where we realized that these are representations that are shared by a large number of eaters in the country, but there are a few exceptions. You have women, for example, who have had uh, a health problem and they decide to follow a healthful diet, or men who want to eat healthy because they want to look good. Hajar, I'm really sorry to cut you off, but you need to know that you've only got about 5 minutes left. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the lockdown and the relationship of women to cooking. So lockdown now has meant that men have spent a lot more time in the house, and so we can suppose that even those who very rarely stepped into the kitchen now have started to take over the kitchen. The lockdown has not really changed much in the cookery content posted on Facebook, but of course people have posted more because people had more free time. But there is one thing that the men members, the male members of Kuzintna have prepared differently, have presented rather differently, and I'd like to show you a few slides. Now here,
Ça bloque au niveau de mon écran.
so
Alors,
my screen seems to be
c'est pas en
blocking.
train c'est pas que ça
Well,
bloque.
I'll share them with you afterwards. So there's a man who says this is the third time that I've made baked bread during the lockdown. There are a lot of posts and shares. I think she's cut off her microphone, maybe.
Du point de vue genre, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me? Yes, it did cut off, but now we can hear you.
La question est de savoir est-ce que cette préparation de
So the
pain au
question
four
is whether or
est
not
quelque chose
baking bread at home,
plus que les autres activités
making
culinaires.
baking bread at home is more a feminine activity or not. So
Est-ce
at
que
the beginning of the lockdown, there were a lot of
website
posts by women saying, "Oh my God, have you ever seen a man baking bread?" And it was very funny, and they thought it was absurd or even a miracle.
la préparation du pain aux femmes et cela tant du côté des hommes que des
Because
femmes.
normally within the Moroccan
Franchement, ça
tradition,
m'a vraiment fait rire au début. Je n'imaginais
it is the men,
je n'imaginais jamais voir des hommes
it's
en tablier en
the
train de pétrir
it's
du
the
pain
women who
et
make
des
bread,
hommes
and so
féminines.
people
Moi,
used to
d'accord,
take who used to make posts saying, "Well, I never imagined that I would see a man
on peut
kneading dough,
passer
wearing a
là, excusez-moi
an
du
apron in the
langage,
kitchen. Or maybe making an omelette, yes, maybe, or doing the washing up, okay, but baking bread, that's really something new."
qu'on considère que le seul cas où ces hommes ressentent
So
vraiment
we
le besoin de le
consider
pratiquer
that
pendant le Covid et lorsqu'ils sont célibataires en
uh,
l'absence de femme
men,
biologique,
when
ils ont
they
besoin de
are
s'organiser.
single, when they have no
Ils ont besoin de
women
préparation
in
de
their
pain
house who would
pour
have done this for
recevoir des
them, they
invités et le
decided
faire
to
dans une
bake bread
famille
for
et
themselves, but only
responsabiliser
for
sa
one
table
person.
pour
Whereas
sans doute une
if it's
préparation
a
de pain
family,
pour deux
obviously the
et
first person in charge of this task
alors
is a
pour
woman because
conclure
she's
je
in
voudrais
charge
je pense
of
qu'on
feeding
a
the
un peu
family.
pu
Now,
discuter
to
tout ce que je
conclude,
voulais dire à propos de cette
I'm sorry I
préparation.
wasn't
Si
able
j'ai
to
bien
say
compris
everything that
sur
I
le site Cuisine
wanted to,
nous
but
avons vu que même ce
uh,
débat
after
avait fait des discussions
observing the
des
site, we've
personnes de
seen
certaines spécialités, de certains
that
aliments, de certaines recettes.
people have been
Et c'est ça
discussing
qui
the
nous pousse
benefits
en
of
plus à
certain
consommer,
foods,
que c'est
certain
surtout grâce au site internet et grâce à
vegetables and
l'influence
fruit,
partagée qu'ils ont compris les combinaisons énormes d'une bonne
and people told
alimentation
us that it
et
was
surtout
thanks
de
to
la
this
bonne
interaction on the
utilisation de
internet
leur
that they
belle
understood what the
connaissance
norms were
avec un espace
for
d'utilisation de leur
healthy
temps
food. And
où
so maybe
sont
internet is the
on pose ces
new
vraies actions de
place
base.
for
Excusez-moi, je cite, excusez-moi, mais l'alimentation, c'est pas
learning
juste
about food.
manger avec
I'm
une
sorry,
silhouette et un
food
sourire.
is not just about
Je vais dire vite.
eating and
L'alimentation est essentielle
swallowing. It's
pour
about
la santé, pour vivre
keeping
et
your
pour tenir,
health,
la
to
forme.
live in peace and to stay healthy.
C'est un post du février
This is a
2019.
post from
Alors, les
February
réseaux sociaux et
2019.
dans notre cas, les groupes
So
communautaires,
the
créent tout
community
l'écosystème
groups and
d'amitié
Facebook
sur les,
groups have
sur les
become
mêmes
an
individus
ecosystem
avec
within
les
which you
mêmes
have
besoins et attentes.
individuals coming
Vous
together who
imaginez
have
une
the
équipe de
same
mangeurs qui regroupe des
expectations and
blogueuses
the same
pour un
desires.
intéressant individu
Kuzintna
une
is
alimentation.
a
Lorsque
space where
l'entreprise nous
people
rassemble, Cousine Nest
share the
participe à notre
same
type de lien social qui se
exactly the
composent
same
qui se connaissent pas forcément bien sur,
interests and
sur
ideas,
l'écran,
people who don't
mais
know
qui
each
puissent
other outside the
échanger à
screen,
propos de la
but who have
cuisine.
decided
Les
to have
photos exemples ont été
exchanges
commentés par des
around
femmes et par
cooking
des hommes
and
et
food.
deviennent des sources d'inspiration
The
pour
photographs are
d'autres.
commented on by men
N'oubliez
and
pas,
women, and they
les
become a
hommes
source
sont
of inspiration
aujourd'hui
for the
et les
others.
femmes
In
dans cette
Kuzintna,
production de contenu culinaire
people are
ainsi que dans la production de normes.
involved,
Cousina est un lieu qui
self-involved by
développe
producing not
l'espace de
just cooking, but
Istanbul
also
express une
afterwards
pensée
standards and
en
norms.
fiction
It
situation
may be a space where
expliquant
you
aisément
can
les coulisses de l'alimentation. Le site,
transgress
un homme de
the
47 ans,
norms and
a partagé un
standards.
sketch
Somebody,
de la
a
différence
man
entre
who's
prendre de
47
la
years
riz
old,
avec
said
des cookies
earlier,
plutôt que de faire à manger. Maintenant, tout
I
se
would much rather have
transforme.
gone out than cook.
Aujourd'hui,
Now things
la
have
cuisine
changed.
dépasse
Today,
les
I
surplats et
make
se fie à
difficult
l'humain et au
dishes
besoin.
like bread and
Et je
couscous,
pense surtout le
and
poids
I
actuel qui était
and
sur le dos de ma mère quand nous
and
étions
now I
ensemble.
realize exactly how much of a
Effectivement,
burden
le
my mother
confinement
had
est
to
un
bear.
autre facteur
So the
pesant qui ont
lockdown
participé
is
à
one
ce mouvement
factor
et
that is
aujourd'hui
making
nous
it
sommes
possible for
convaincus
men to
dans notre
participate in
écosystème que
this
d'autres
movement,
hommes sont
and
capables
men
de
can see on
participer
social
et à
networks that
manger
other
sans
men
un
can
sentiment
cook and can talk
de
about cooking and
stigmatisation
be proud of
ou
it without
forcément
feeling that they can
osent,
be stigmatized
osent
by that,
s'introduire
and
dans des
therefore they
activités précédemment
themselves can
considérées comme
dare
relevant des
to
femmes
go
comme
into an
le temps.
activity
Donc,
for a long
cette
time was
invitation ne sera
confined to women.
non, je
So
n'arrive pas à partager avec vous
I'm sorry,
l'application bloque et j'arrive pas à partager avec vous les photos.
I can't show you the slides. So
Alors,
Florence says I can do
j'essaie à
that for you.
partir de la
Yes, if you don't mind.
slide numéro 12.
Slide number 12. From slide number 12 onwards, please. Thank you, Florent.
Alors ici, c'est bon?
Je pense que c'est bon et il vous reste quand même encore 3
You've
minutes.
got
Donc,
3 minutes left, so you can
Ici, par
carry on.
exemple, je lance
So
une
here, for
recherche
example, I
sur
started a
le moteur de recherche
search
du groupe. On le
on the
follow
group
version, ça veut dire
search
écrit.
with
Et
the
il y a pas
word
mal de
need,
posts,
to need
pas mal
do.
de
And there were a
publications.
lot of
Et là, il y
publications,
a
a lot of
un
posts, and there
succès
are
sur
two
l'éditeur. Et
posts
là,
from
et là,
men
par exemple, on dit,
talking
voilà, je
about
suis là,
kneading
j'en ai,
dough and
il y a
making
une
bread.
recette
So the first one
excellente de
says,
pain. Le
he
deuxième
says,
post,
my dear brother has
voilà,
made
le
all of
post,
this
et là,
bread.
quelqu'un
And
qui
the
prend
second
déjà un
post
mode de préparation
is
d'un
somebody who is
pain qui
giving
n'a
them,
plus de
giving
glace.
to giving
La
other
deuxième,
people
le slide numéro 2, s'il vous plaît.
the way to make a specific type of bread.
Alors,
And
le
slide
slide
number
numéro
13
13
now.
présente
And on this one, you can
les
see
photos d'une femme qui dit
the
sur son
photographs of
groupe que
that
son
a woman
frère
has
a
posted to
réussi
the group
à
saying that her
fabriquer en
brother
fait, j'avais
managed to make
c'est pas
really
très
good but
difficile de faire
both. And this
cette
is not an easy
fabrication. Et
bread to
apparemment,
make,
son,
and
son,
her
son
brother
frère
managed
a
it beautifully.
à la
And so
réaliser.
she was
Et
very
c'est
proud of
la
it, and she
citation
posted
d'Alain,
on it.
c'est la troisième fois qu'il
And
pétrit le
a
pain
man
pendant le
says,
confinement. Et
this
ensuite,
man
il y a
says this is the third time
aujourd'hui,
he's
il y a
baked
trois
bread during the
catégories. Il y a
lockdown.
des hommes
So there are three
qui ont
categories. There are men
fait cette
who
activité dans le cadre
have
d'une
carried
vidéo.
out this
Comme par exemple
activity,
celui-là, il y a d'autres,
uh,
voilà, c'est toujours dans le cadre d'une
this
vidéo
one.
en direct, je pétris
So
pour
this
moi.
was a
Et
joke, for
pour
example,
ensuite le
saying, "Oh
mettre
my
au slide
God, can you
numéro
imagine
13.
a
Et
Moroccan
après,
man
les hommes
kneading dough and making bread?" And then this
ont
one,
aussi
where you're saying,
relevé le défi de faire, de réaliser des pains
during the lockdown,
des
men
pains
also
très
took up the
consistants,
challenge of
solides.
making
En
breads,
fait,
bread
il me dit que
and little
slide numéro
pancakes.
18, s'il vous plaît.
And number 18, please, which is one I really like a lot.
oui, ça y est, j'affiche la slide numéro 18. Vous avez peut-être un petit
Ah,
délai.
Yes, you have slide number
ouais, en
18.
fait, j'aime beaucoup cette photo, c'est parce
So I
que
really
pour
like
moi,
this
il commence à
photograph
faire,
very much
on a
because
la
for me
pâte,
it's symbolic. On the one hand, you have dough, and then you have a man's face, hand, sorry, with his ring. And this is very typically a masculine ring. I've never seen a woman wearing a ring like this. And it's so therefore it is a ring that symbolizes power and masculinity. And so I really like this photograph. It's very, very symbolic of the changes. So to conclude, I would say that we're right at the beginning of this change, and because of the symposium, we were able to look at spaces that are very rarely explored to see how cooks are represented in society and how food is looked at by people who are cooking and people who are eating, and with changes maybe that will take place over the long term, and things that change masculinity and femininity, where are the borders moving to, and what are the changes coming to us. Thank you very much.